Hello everyone, this is Jakekub, and today I'm going over the making of the Abstraction UHC Season 4 intro. So, let's get started here. I'm not going to play the intro because, it's just, you can go watch the intro if you want to know. This is just me going over how I made the intro. So, I'm going to start with these three blue layers, down here. So, if I disable these top two, you'll see that this layer right here it's literally just circles. I'll disable the team layers as well so it's easier to see. This is just a circle graphic thing, and that just creates and it's just nice for the background, right? So then the next part, the other thing you'll notice is that at the start we have a Gaussian border, so you can't really see that it's the circle thing, but it's still there. It's got a very high Gaussian border. I started at 600, and then it just fades into no Gaussian border. Well, it goes down to a Gaussian border value of 40. If I go ahead and disable that Gaussian border, you'll see that it's the Gaussian border helps it a lot. If you have a background that just doesn't really you think it looks good, but it if you're looking at the background too much, adding a blur effect to it will kind of take away from the background a bit. But if the background is important to the intro, it's it has something to do with the game mode or the theme you're trying to get across, then don't blur it. But in this situation, I feel like the blur helps out tremendously. But that's really just situation by situation. So that's just this first layer. The other thing that goes on is we also have very minor screen bumps that are very hard to notice if I don't slow it down. You can't really even notice it because there's a lot going on with the players and the text and the background gradients. But it's there. Yeah, I don't know. It adds something. So now we go on to this next layer, which is a gold glitter loop. And if I set this to normal, you will see what it actually looks like. It's just very sparkly and stuff. But this right here is called the blending mode. I don't know if you can see this drop down here, but I can change it from normal to hard light or to soft light where you can't see it, or just overlay. But I have it on hard light because if I set it to overlay, it's still visible, but I think really if I set it to soft light, it's just not visible. Hard light, you can really see the sparkles. And when I was first tasked with, I don't want to say tasked, when I was first asked to make this intro, I knew I wanted to go for a more funky vibe, and I feel like the glitter and the bright colors added a lot. So that's why I have it set to a hard light blending mode. And for those that don't know what a blending mode does, it will take the layer of footage and it will blend it into the layer beneath. So if I set it back to normal, you'll see that when I disable the opacity on this first layer, nothing changes because this layer is above the other one. But when I set it to hard light, it's going to blend this gold glitter into the circular background, as you can see right here. And then this last layer we have here is, if I enable it, this is where all the colors come in. So again, I'm going to set this to normal and you can see what it looks like. It's honestly kind of bland, but again, this is something that hard light does. It really makes those colors pop. And in soft light, you'll see it doesn't really work, especially at the bottom there. It creates a very gross color at the bottom there, but setting it to hard light, it just looks really beautiful. The bright colors, it matches the logo. It matches the whole funky groove I got going on here. So I think that's it for these three background layers. Let's move up here to the logo. So the logo, it fades in. It starts out quite far back. You'll see that the scale value is pretty high, but that's because the logo was only 600 by 800 or something like that. It was a fairly small file size compared to the 1080p screen that we have here. So it scales up, and then when you know the intro does the whole woohoo, and I make it kind of scale up very big. You'll see it goes from 150 up to 320, I think. It goes up to 320, yeah. So it does a very big like scale in. And the other thing you'll notice when it goes in, there's like the woohoo. I already said that, but there's the woo and then there's the who, which is 2 beats. So it's starting at a degree rotation of 5, goes to -7, and then goes back to like 8, I think. So that creates like a nice kind of, it goes from side to side thing. It goes from one side to the other. It works well with the whole woohoo thing. A lot of intro makers will use rotations on their logo, and that's fine. It works. It adds something rather than just a scaling intro. Or just scaling the logo up. And then at the end of the woohoo, it just fades out into 0. And now we get into this massive amount of layers here. And I am going to start very simply with this first layer right here. With these first 2 layers right here, we have Team 1 and Team 2. So if we go into the logo/graphics, you'll see that I have all these backgrounds. So there's also this bar, which I was going to use at the start, and then I realized that it did not look good at all, so I got rid of it. So you have the Team 1 and Team 2, and you'll notice that Team 1 and Team 2 are purple and green, which is why they're as such. The color values for all of these are actually in sync, so the color backgrounds came in at the end when I was done with all the text. So the text, the value of the purple that I use for the text is the value of the purple at the bottom on Team 1, and then it goes darker by like 20 units or whatever. Whereas for the green, the exact value of the green text is at the top, and then it's 20 values darker at the bottom. I know it's not really noticeable, but it's kind of just a more in my head thing, it's clean. That's basically all it is. It's just clean. So that's how I made those backgrounds. And it's just opening up a thing in Photoshop, doing a selection halfway down the middle, and then using the gradient tool. It's fairly simple to make these. It didn't take me too long. So again, you'll notice that on these, we are playing with the blending mode again here. This time we are using color because hard light is very harsh. Soft light you can't really notice, and overlay you can't really notice here. Color, what color does is it'll take the color of your image or graphic or whatever, and it'll just overlay it. It won't play with the lighting or anything. It'll just overlay it. Even though you can clearly see that it's darker than it shows up on here, that's because it's using a blending mode. It has to blend it, so it's not going to look exactly the same darkness. Same with the green. So what you'll now notice is that they come in So you'll notice this with the team backgrounds. The one on the left side is going to come from the bottom up to the top, and we have an edge feather. If I set this to 0, it's going to look pretty ugly. Adding the edge feather makes it blend in more. You always want to try and smooth out anything that you do if you can. Because just doing harsh, like, if there's no edge feather, then it's just not going to look very good, really. I mean, you can make it work, but adding an edge feather just to blend the transition, I guess, it really, really helps. So if you can add an edge feather, I don't know if Vegas has this, but I know that Premiere, a lot of them, you can add an edge feather, and it really helps. So the team on the left goes from bottom to top. Team on the right goes from top to bottom, which the edge feather. And that's really all it is. And it's all synced up. So these are all, I believe, 8 frames, maybe 10 frames. But if we go into the players, you'll see that the keyframes all line up on 113. So the backgrounds will finish going in as the players stop doing the really fast movement from top to bottom. The other thing you'll notice, well, I guess now that we're done with those backgrounds, we can move on to the players and the text. So you'll notice that it's a very symmetrical intro. The 2 players in the middle are going to come in from the bottom. The 2 players from the top are going to come in on the far sides. And this is all like, I did the math for this, and all the movements are perfectly mathematical. So if we look at normal here, it starts at 1550 to -500, and then moves over to 1700 and 500. So 1550 to 1700 is a movement of 150 units. So when we go over to ISA, you'll notice that we go from 1650 to 1400. This time it's decreasing, but it's still 150 units. So I did that kind of math to make sure the movements all look fine and dandy. Yeah, that's basically it. I made sure that it all just looked smooth enough, with all the keyframing and whatever. And the same will go for the other side as well. It's just that the values are a little bit different. They're mirrored or whatever. And then they're just going to quickly go, the ones on the far sides, since they come in from the top, they're going to keep going down. The ones that come in from the bottom, they're going to keep going up. It looks pretty nice. And then when we get, again, each transition is the whole woohoo. So, as we did with the Abstraction logo at the start, where it scales up and then scales back, we have it all scale up again. It scales up quite quick, so you'll know it goes from 150 up to 190 very fast. I went up to, well, here's why I went up to 190, because then it keeps going up to 200 very quick, and then it very quickly scales down to 0. And I mean, by the time we're at 95 here, they're all off the screen anyway, so you can't entirely notice it. But I don't think that really makes a huge difference anyway. It's still that movement of it scales up and then it scales back, basically. That's all it is. And I think that whole idea of scaling in, scaling out works really well with the beat, the woohoo. And I am a terrible voice actor doing that, by the way. So yeah, the other thing that I'm going to point out is that the rotation, you'll notice that cold and Len are a rotation of 7.5 degrees, Isa and Normo at -7.5. It's a very symmetrical intro, and I worked with angles a lot, which made the numbers a little bit hard to work with. Like, setting up this first team by itself took me probably a solid 2 hours. It was a pain to set up, but once I had it set up, it was very easy to just copy-paste it to all of the other teams here. So really, nothing else really changes that much for any of these other teams. It's the same exact motions for all of the players and all of the text. So I don't have to really go over any of this. The only other change I'm going to talk about, really, before I move on to the text, is that there's a funky, like, trumpet beat that happens every 4 teams. It happens on the 2nd team, the 6th team, and the 10th team, and then on the last credit, which is, I believe, me, the intro credit. So, what we have happening here, we have an adjustment layer. An adjustment layer will affect everything underneath it, and you'll notice that this isn't symmetrical. If this was symmetrical, these 2 keyframes right here would be in the middle, but they're not. What this does, by not having it at the middle, it makes it non-linear. It makes it so it comes in fast and then takes longer to fade out. So what this does is, so what we do here, the first effect is we have the brightness and contrast. I'm going to disable the transformation. So you can see we have the brightness and the contrast increased. That's all it does. It works well with the trumpet beat, I think. And then the other thing that happens is we have this transformation where it's going to scale in from 100 to 120, and then we're going to have a rotation to kind of make it angle. Could I have done something better for here? Sure. But I wanted to make sure to accentuate this beat, because otherwise this intro would be more bland than I already feel it is. I feel like it's a solid intro, but it is quite repetitive. If I didn't add this effect, it would be even more repetitive than it already is. So this is just a tip for most intro makers. If you have some beat that isn't on every team, or maybe not even every other, if it's on every other, sure, you can work with it. But if it's something like here where it's every 4 beats, make sure to do some sort of a special effect for it, because it'll really help with varying up the intro and making it not super repetitive. That's the best advice that I can give. So, now let's move on to the text. Before I go into how I made the text, you'll notice that there are these cuts. These cuts are brightness increases. So you'll notice that the brightness increases from 0 to 70. The text flashes. that's to sync with the beats. I feel like it just worked. It was the first thing I really tried, and I thought it worked. That's about all there is to it. And it makes it, like, if I didn't have these, and there was no brightness and contrast, it'd literally just be the players moving up and down with the text. That would be very boring. Adding something on these beats makes it less boring, less bland. It adds more to the intro. It's a small detail, but otherwise, if you're just looking at the players moving from, let's see, 109 to, for basically 2 seconds, it's just players moving, and nothing's happening. It's kind of boring. Just adding that one little text flash, it adds a lot to an intro. Even if it's such a small effect, but it does add a lot. So let's get into how I made the text. You'll notice that over here, there are 100 text files. So why is this? So we have the first text right here. The font is crab meal, by the way. And here's the color, which is the right color. You'll notice that the text is right there, but it's still showing up over ISA. That's because the text is nested. What nesting means, it's a sequence, which is probably a more common term than nest. Premiere just uses nesting. I don't know why. So the reason I had to nest them is we had the green font here, and because the drop shadow, I'm not a huge fan of the drop shadow in Premiere, I have a pure black text file that's the same size and everything. So I can go over how I made this really quick. I'll just come over to the end here, and I'll drag ISA, and I will drag that there. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy. See, this is ISA's thing right there. I'm going to copy the effects. You'll notice that it's the same movements, so it's going to follow the player. By copying and pasting, you'll make sure that you don't have to like redo it every time. So by pasting it, you put it right here. Obviously, this is just for showing you guys, like, the length of the clip is a little bit different, sure. But what you'll see is that it follows the movement that the players would have. The only thing that I would have to change is, before I made the duplicate black file, I would have to position this text correctly, so when the effects are placed, it's on the correct spot on the player. But then what you do from here, once you have those two files, instead of just leaving them, you can right-click, nest, and make it into a sequence. And I'll just name it that, and there you go. You have your text file, and that's it, really. It definitely saves space. There would be an extra 4 layers on top of all of this if I didn't do it, and it's already 16 tracks, so it helped conserve space. In the long run, was it a good idea? Not entirely, but I'll get onto that. So anyway, that's basically it for the intros themselves. Everything else is really repetitive. I went over the text, I went over the players, I went over these small effects. Now let's get into the credits. This is where things get a little different, because now I can't repeat the same formula that I had been using the entire time. So, at the credits, I stopped doing the brightness flashes. Could I have kept them? Sure. But if I wanted to keep it, especially with only three players instead of 4, an odd amount of players, it's not gonna work as well as it would have, because you can make it very symmetrical. You have bam, bam, and then you transition out. When you're doing this, you'd have to, if I wanted to make it work, I'd have to do Mav and Bacon, and then I'd have to do Gus by himself. Sure, it would work, but it's not gonna look as pretty as the other ones. I also had to create custom movements for these, since I couldn't copy over the other ones. So they all come in from the top on this one. They all fade down, and Gus just goes straight down, but Bacon and Matt, they're gonna go inwards a little bit, to kind of, I don't know, rather than have them separate, I had them go, and that was just a personal choice. And again, on the Woohoo, they scale in, and then they scale out. Really the only thing that changes here is that it's just the movement changes, because I can't duplicate the movement from the other players. Cycle 1 and Jamie, I was actually able to just copy the movements. I just had to change the numbers a bit to make it fit. And then for here, for Julian and myself, I really just copied Gus's thing because Gus just went straight down, and Julian and I would also just go straight down, really. You'll notice here that the text is the same colors as their team. Sure, I could have made their text colors different for the credits, but I don't know. I think this works fine. And then here with Jamie's text is the same color. Cycle 1 wasn't on a team, so he has his own color. Julian has his own color. I have my own color. And then we just repeat. I just brought in the Abstraction logo at the end, and I copied the movement and pasted it onto here, and that's about it for this intro. I don't think there's too much more for me to go over. It's fairly simplistic. I could go into how I made the double dates intro, but it's fairly easy. A lot of it was just switching around the players. Because there's no crossfades in between all of these, because at the end of them they are all just completely off screen, as you can see. By zooming in here, I can go multiple frames before it actually ends, and they're just not on screen. So I don't need a crossfade transition in between them. So what this allows me to do is I can just say, hey, 4X and Shy Gus, you are now over here above 4X or above 2 and Dom. And I can just switch them around very easily. The only problem this created was that not all of the clips were the same length, and this more so became a problem for the text because I couldn't edit the actual, both the black text and the colored text. So I had to play around with right click and then the speed and duration. So it wasn't as mathematically perfect, but when you're watching the intro through, it's really not that noticeable, the differences. So sure, the double dates intro isn't perfect by any means, but I wasn't really in the mood to go ahead and recreate 100 text files. So I think that's about it. If you have any questions on anything that I might have forgotten in this intro, feel free to leave a comment down below. And yeah, that's about it for me. Thank you for watching. I will see you all next time.